And you may go, Joe.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Joe Remsen. I'm the Chelsea Reformed Democratic Club's Executive Vice President. Excited for our forum tonight. I think it's going to be a great one on congestion pricing. Our host for the evening, Charles Bear, our district leader and a fellow member of the executive board for CRDC. And we've got some really exciting panelists. So thank you to all of them in advance for being here. But we've got Senator Brad Hoylman, who will be on the call, I know, but also his Chief of Staff, Jacob Priley. So thank you, Jacob, for being here. We've got Transportation Alternatives founder, Charles Komanoff, who we're excited to have be here. And thank you, Charles, for joining us. The president of Penn South, their board of directors, Ambur Nicosia, also obviously also a member of CRDC, who I think will be very thrilled to hear from. And last but not least, Penn South Co-op Counsel, Howard Babich. I see Howie, so I'm going to call you Howie. Nice to meet you, but we're excited to have you. So Charles, I'll turn it over to you. And thank you to everyone who's on, and we'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Joe, I'm going to ask you one favor. When we get to the speaking part, to time everyone, we're on timing. So I'm the district leader, as Joe just pointed, and we have a very exciting meeting on congestive pricing, and with people that are very well versed in it. So well, they've all been introduced, so I can go right. Charles Komanoff, Senator Hoylman, Ambur Nicosia, and Howard Babich. Basically, this is the format for tonight. Each one of you will be given 10 minutes to state your case, basically. At the close of that, anybody have the, can you mute everybody?
Let me see.
And then following their presentation.
It's in your ear.
Have you muted everybody? Yes? All right. Following their presentation, I will present a few questions to the participants. Generally, any one of them can answer the question if they choose, or more than one. After that, we will go to general questions from the audience. Oh, I see Senator Hoylman is here. So, as I promised Senator Hoylman he can be the first one to go. So, please. Go ahead, Brad, it's yours.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really great to see you, Charles. Thank you, CRDC, and to the panelists who are here. Yes, I know I did not need to get dressed up for this, but I have, thanks for that comment. But I have several events tonight, but I really definitely wanted to stop by. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman. Mindy, thank you, Charles and CRDC, for letting me give some comments on this important panel discussion tonight. I'm very proud, I have to tell you, to have voted for and supported congestion pricing. The status quo just isn't sustainable for our health, the environment, quality of life, or street safety. And the revenue from the program is going to help ensure the MTA is able to fully address its capital needs, including critical upgrades for folks with disabilities and seniors. That's $15 billion over 5 years. I want to start by saying that I strongly support appointing a Manhattan resident, preferably somebody who lives within the pricing zone, on the Traffic Mobility Review Board. That's called the TMRB. That's going to be the board that decides the real contours of this program. We need them to represent New Yorkers who are most directly impacted by congestion pricing. And the people who are most directly impacted, frankly, are our neighbors, my constituents, who are subsumed within the zone. The enabling legislation that we passed, Assembly Member Godfrey and I both voted for it, has a number of provisions and exemptions that we helped negotiate, and I think are going to be crucial to the program. For example, those traveling on the FDR and the West Side Highway, but not entering the city, are going to be exempt from the zone fees, and those earning less than $60,000 are exempt. Vehicles transporting disabled New Yorkers are exempt, and emergency vehicles are also exempt. I think these are all crucial exemptions, but we have to look at whether further exemptions may be appropriate. I hope that the TMRB looks at London as a model. London has successfully implemented their congestion pricing program. It's been in effect for a number of years. And for the beginning of the program, they had a fee reduction for everybody who lived in the pricing zone, up to 90% of the fee. A fee reduction for everyone that lives in the zone may make sense for us here in New York. We're currently in the midst of an outreach period in which I encourage everyone on this Zoom to voice your thoughts on the program. CBTP at mtabt.org. Jacob Priley, my chief of staff, will put that in the chat. He's on here. Thank you, Jacob. So I'm looking forward to having a robust, to ensure that Manhattanites, especially, just fully consider. I've already met with the board of Penn South, and will continue to be available as this program has its public comment period. But I want to say very clearly, we need congestion pricing urgently. The program has been forecast to save up to $100 million in health cost savings annually in New York City. Fossil fuel consumption and carbon dioxide emissions are going to be cut as well. London, which implemented its original congestion pricing scheme in 2003, has seen a reduction in these indices by 20%. And as we see the impact of climate change all around us, we're going to have to implement solutions. And the system is also going to improve the safety of our streets. As I'm sure you're aware, you've heard Dick and me and Corey and others say New York City is in a street safety crisis. This year, there have been at least 199 traffic fatalities, putting 2021 on pace to be the deadliest year since the launching of Vision Zero almost 8 years ago. By reducing traffic congestion, we'll reduce cars and crashes and make our streets safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. Additionally, congestion pricing promises to be a financial lifeline for our struggling mass transit system, which is reeling from the impact of dramatically lower ridership due to the pandemic. Congestion pricing is going to help modernize our subway and bus system. And boy, we need buses. Buses are the way to go, folks. Decrease commute times and increase accessibility for New Yorkers with disabilities. Finally, traffic is responsible for tremendous economic costs that's going to be curtailed through congestion pricing. According to one study, congestion pricing can save up to $20 billion in related economic costs to our regional economy. The economic impact of this recession that was caused by COVID-19, the mass unemployment, business interruption, people who can't pay rent. I think that we can come together and create a system that achieves everything that we want. The real decision on whether we have congestion pricing or not has been made already, but the contours of the plan and how it impacts our neighbors, my constituents, have yet to be decided. So it's so important that you let us know through this event, Charles, that you and CRDC are having to clear or call me at 212-633-8052. Jacob is going to be on this Zoom. I've got a schedule tonight that doesn't permit me to, but I wanted to definitely say a few words and thank you for your leadership, Charles and Mindy, for hosting this tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad, for appearing tonight. Jacob will take over now in your stead.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next speaker. What I'm doing is balancing it, one pro and one opposed, and we'll turn to Ambur and Nicosia.
Thank you, Charles. I think that one of the things that Brad highlighted is really what we need to focus on tonight, which is, yes, congestion pricing has been passed by law, but we are far from getting to what would be an acceptable draft of what should be implemented. So just to go back a little bit and talk about what congestion pricing is, in 2019, a law was passed saying the MTA needed to raise $15 billion through congestion pricing. But they didn't put the details of the plan in place at the time. So that's what we're trying to iron out right now. In the plan, they think they're going to raise $15 billion by identifying the area below 60th Street to pay for this. At $12 or $14 a car, it is an insurmountable amount of cars have to be captured to come up with the amount of money they say is necessary. And I also want to highlight that very often you're finding that some of the same people who support congestion pricing also support Hudson Yards, and they also support the Empire Complex. Both of these are below 60th Street, and they're going to be the biggest drivers for increasing traffic, which is going to be captured by this new tax. And furthermore, if you look at the details of the MTA plan, Brad did highlight one of the areas, which is the upgrade to the system. The other thing that you have to know is that the money that's going to be raised in this area of Manhattan exclusively is going to go to pay for the 2nd Avenue subway, the tunnel going into Queens, into Brooklyn. I mean, this is the MTA saying we're going to tax people in one neighborhood to have capital projects and improvements in another neighborhood. It is inherently wrong. You have to be able to, at least identify the issues in the neighborhood that you're going to implement the plan in. The other issue is that the MTA needs the money now. They don't want a reduction in traffic because you can't have an increase in cars to pay for your capital projects and expenses and a decrease in vehicles. They need the traffic. So you can't say both of those things simultaneously. The MTA will never get the money that they need if there is a reduction in traffic. Brad alluded a little bit to the London plan. It is true that there's a 90% discount for residents who are living within the area that's defined by the tax. And I don't personally think that we should be drawing a line on a map to come up with who should pay and who shouldn't. But if you're going to use the London plan as a model, there are protections in there that we also need to see in our current plan as well. One of them, I mean, Brad alluded to it, there is a $60,000 income exemption. I want to tell you, I went on this morning and I looked at what you make if you work at McDonald's at $15 an hour. You're talking about people who are making an average of $34,000 a year. Under this current plan, if your parents both worked at McDonald's, you would make too much money to get an exemption under what's currently being proposed. We have to amend this. This is not a genuine plan for working people in our community. The second thing are seniors. They rely on their vehicles for their healthcare needs. Accessoride does not give them the assurance they need for their medical care. Many of our seniors say they use their vehicles because they know they can depend on. We've heard a lot from the small businesses in our community. They're very upset about this proposal. There needs to be an exemption to protect the smaller businesses in our community. Brad is right. There is an exemption for the FDR and for the West Side Highway. These are supply chains. Large businesses use them coming into Manhattan to distribute goods in Brooklyn and Queens. These are the kind of people who are creating the congestion that is so dangerous in our community, and no exemption should be given to them coming in with the volume of trucks that we're now beginning to see, our small businesses here in our neighborhood need those exemptions first. When it comes to the environment and the London plan, there were incentives for people who were purchasing green cars because they wanted a reduction in noise. They wanted a reduction in the fossil fuels. They wanted a reduction in the type of vehicles that were coming into the neighborhood. We don't have a tax incentive for alternative types of electric cars. We need to include that if we want to see that represented in the kind of cars that people are buying. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk about briefly before I run out of time is that there needs to be an exemption for the people who are coming into our community, the working people, the working class, middle class, and lower middle class people who are coming into our communities from the outside to service and care for us. There needs to be an exemption and a carve out for the police department, the fire department, for our teachers, and for our nursing staff. We cannot reasonably expect people, these are not traditional 9-to-5 jobs. And we need to make sure that there's a carve out for these people who are coming here that we depend on. And lastly, when it comes to congestion pricing, we need alternatives before this plan is put into place. We need somebody to put in elevators at the subways. We need them to fix Access-a-Ride. We have to expand the bike share program. We have to develop a realistic plan for our small businesses who are already hurt by COVID. And more importantly, and this is really at the crux of it, is that we need accountability from the MTA about where the money is going to go once it's raised. The MTA has been broke. I'm a native New Yorker. The MTA has been broke my entire life, and there has to be accountability for money that's raised and how it's going to be used.
Okay. Thank you, Ambur. Thank you. Our next speaker is Charles Komanoff. Mr. Komanoff comes with a great deal of experience in transportation alternatives and many other areas. So, Mr. Komanoff, please.
Charles, thank you. Hey, just 2 quick personal notes to get started. Miriam Fisher, are you still on the call? I want to say hi. And I used to live in Chelsea. I lived on West 22nd Street for 4.5 years in the 1970s. It was a long time ago, but I know the neighborhood well, and I really I like it. It's a great part of town. So Brad,
Very gentrified.
sorry.
Very gentrified near the High Line.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not talking about that. In fact, I still remember when the West Side Highway was abandoned, decrepit, and we could all go up on it and create a wonderful free space that was so much more vernacular and wonderful and communitarian than the High Line. But that's just my own personal bias. So I want to start with Brad's remarks, which were a ringing endorsement of congestion pricing. And of course, I was glad to hear that. What I would say to Brad, and since he's not here, Jacob, I'm going to sort of direct this part of my remarks to you, is that let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We're not going to have congestion pricing if residents of the congestion zone, Manhattan south of 60th Street, get the kinds of carve-outs that Ambur was calling for, and that to some extent Senator Hoylman was calling for. And there's really sort of 2 reasons for that. One is that the more that we residents, and I'm also a resident of the district, I live in Tribeca now, the more that we clamor for our own carve-outs, the more we are going to sow resentment among people who live in Sheepshead Bay and Springfield Gardens and Sunnyside and Montclair, New Jersey and Scarsdale and Greenwich, Connecticut, and all the places where people drive into the city now and who are going to be paying the congestion charge to fill the MTA coffers as we all seem to want. We residents of the congestion zone are going to benefit so much more than the people who will be driving in from outside. It is we who will get the biggest reductions in traffic congestion, we who will experience the greatest improvement in air quality, we who will enjoy the greatest gain in safe streets, we who will have our buses move faster and who will have bike share and bicycles be safer and more comfortable for all of us to use. Now, it's not as if people who live outside aren't going to realize benefits as well, because with less traffic coming into the district, all those outlying areas will also experience improved travel flow. But it is we south of 60th Street who will proportionately realize the greatest gains. And the people who live outside kind of understand that. And the more that we call for special treatment, the more the people who live outside are going to clamor for their own exemptions. And before we know it, the whole sort of fragile, and I think it is fragile to some extent, compact that led to the passage of the legislation that Ambur pointed to in March 2019, we are going to jeopardize that. But the other way that we're going to jeopardize that coalition is that the legislation does require, again, as Ambur pointed out, that the MTA be able to bond $15 billion in capital investment, of which 80%, $12 billion will go to the subways and 10% each will go to the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. And so the fewer trips that are going to be tolled or priced because of exemptions, the more everybody else is going to be charged more to make up that loss. And that fact also is not lost on people who live outside the zone. So we've got to sort of decide, do we want congestion pricing or not? Now, I understand, Ambur, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I know that you don't seem to want it, and I'll come to you in a second. Okay. But Brad wants it. Okay, I'm sorry if I'm mischaracterizing it, but Brad wants it, and Dick Gottfried wants it. They voted for it. Senator Glick voted for, Assemblymember Glick voted, my assembly member voted for it as well. And we're going to have to take what some of us might consider to be the bad to get the good. So that's sort of my point to Brad. Please don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And please, I appeal to you, Jacob, to have Senator Hoylman rein in his call for carve-outs or exemptions and to just say, congestion pricing, it may not be perfect. No public policy ever is, but it is such a fabulous thing for this city. Every day that we don't have it, the people of the city of New York are giving up an estimated $10 million in benefits. That's my number. I do the modeling. I did the model that was relied on by the former governor's Fix NYC panel from 2017 to 2019. The net benefits of congestion pricing in terms of saved travel time, not just for car commuters, but for man with van or gal with van, 18-wheelers, people in buses, as well as people in cars, cabs, Ubers, et cetera. All of those people, their time savings, plus the better air, the more biking and walking we're going to have because our streets aren't going to be quite as chaotic and mean and dangerous, the reduced carbon emissions, the fewer crashes, all of those things total to about $3.5 billion a year in benefits that congestion pricing is going to deliver to us, which works out to $10 million a day. Let's not delay things anymore, and let's not even open the door to losing this fabulous piece of public policy. Now, in my remaining time, I do want to address what Ambur said, and I'm mostly going to say, look at the people who supported congestion pricing to get it through the legislature 2.5 years ago, and who support it just as ardently today. The Community Service Society, the nation's oldest and most respected anti-poverty organization, led by the great social justice fighter David R. Jones, strongly supports congestion pricing. And their support rests on the analysis that they did back in 2017 and that they're kind of redoing today. And I'm told that they pretty much have the same findings, that for every one lower income worker who commutes by car into the district or lives in the district and commutes out and would get charged coming back in, for every one such car commuting low income person, there are 38 New Yorkers who rely on subways and buses and who will benefit from the investment in improved subway and bus service that will be paid for through the congestion revenues and will be enabled by streets that are going to be less crowded so that buses are actually going to be able to get somewhere. Look at the Riders Alliance, the fabulous multiracial, multi-borough group of transit advocates that has sort of taken the baton from the Strap Hangers Alliance. They are down the line for congestion pricing, even as they understand the limits of the governance of the MTA, and they are working as hard as anybody to reform budgeting and spending and capital investment by the MTA. They support congestion pricing. Look at these organizations and please don't raise red herrings about Hudson Yards or the Penn Station redevelopment. I mean, what are we actually talking about? I mean, whether or not people support those things, and I certainly didn't, that's not my vision or version of a city. You know, let's keep the discussion on the merits of congestion pricing itself. And Ambur, my last point to you is that the Second Avenue subway is largely paid for. And the money is committed from the federal government. Ditto that East Side access boondoggle. What congestion pricing revenues will do for the subway is to speed the uptake of signals modernization so that train lines that now can only accommodate 20 trains an hour, you know, subway lines, will be able to accommodate 25 or 30, which means faster, more reliable, and more convenient service. That's what our congestion revenues are being paid for.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you. Is everyone, Mindy, is everyone muted because we have this background noise?
No, I caught it and I'm muted. I'm keeping an eye.
Okay. All right. Our next speaker is Howard Babich, also from Penn South Community Co-op Council.
Okay, thanks, Charles, and thanks the CRDC for having this and inviting me. First of all, let me say one thing I think everybody here can agree on is that there is congestion in New York. No one doubts that. And we all agree that congestion sucks. Let's face it, no one likes it. But then again, I think what we're here disagreeing about is what causes the congestion, who's responsible for it, who's to blame, who's going to have to carry the burden of dealing with it. That's what we have to we have to address here. I think with the late Senator Patrick Moynihan, who once said that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but everyone's not entitled to their own facts. And a lot of the facts that have been presented here are just not true. And it's just not the case. There were two things I really want to address here is tonight and see where we go from there. Basically the merits or the lack of merits of the proposal and the issue of carve-outs. On the merits itself, there are basically two, and Amber talked about this earlier, and I just want to echo it. There are two basic goals of this program, of this proposal. One is to raise all this money, all these billions for the MTA, and the other is to dissuade people from driving into the district and reducing congestion. But if you look at it logically, those two aims seem to contradict themselves. If we are keeping all these cars out of the district, how are we raising all these billions for the MTA? And then if we do raise all these billions for the MTA, obviously we're not keeping cars out of the district. So the plan hasn't even been implemented yet, and already it's a 50% failure. So much for that. And then I think there are a lot of people who have come to me and said, well, I don't have a car, so it's not going to affect me. And I think we have to change that really myopic view of looking upon it. It's not whether only the people who have cars who are going to be affected by this. Anyone who takes a for-hire vehicle, anyone who takes a cab, or up at Lincoln Center, takes a cab home at night, or is at Kennedy Airport and takes an Uber home, are going to have to pay this fee. Anybody who goes to Gristedes and buys a loaf of bread, a quart of milk, is going to pay this fee in higher prices. I mean, the federal government came out the other day with a wholesale price index of 8.5%. Add on top of that, congestion pricing, we're talking about double-digit inflation for people who live in the district. I mean, you talk about, this is not going to hurt the poor. Of course it's going to hurt the poor. Of course it's going to hurt working class people. They have to pay, they have to buy loaves of bread and buy quarts of milk. So it's going to affect everybody. It's a regressive fee that's going to hit the poor hardest, and there's no way of ignoring that fact. As for, looking at what the blame is for congestion, I did a little survey of my own, and anyone here, I would urge them to I have a little noise here.
I don't know who that.
Okay, anyone could go out and do this. It's very unscientific. I admit it. It's very, very amateurish. But I went out and stood on the corner in front of my building on 24th Street and 8th Avenue and spent an hour just counting the cars, looking at license plates. And you could tell what type of car they are, whether it's a hire vehicle that has a TLC plate, or it's a cab or whatnot. Less than 20% of the cars I counted were private cars. All the rest were for-hire vehicles, taxi cabs, commercial vehicles. But yet it's the private car owner and the private motorist that's going to have to pay. It's almost like blaming the crime victim for the crime. It's the city in its original report called Move New York, basically, I guess in the form of a mea culpa, admitted that they themselves, the city itself, is to blame for congestion for two reasons: lack of enforcement of traffic laws, double parking, parking in bus lanes and the like, and for construction, street construction and building construction. There was a time a few years ago on 10th Avenue around 28th Street when two huge buildings were going up on either side, on the east and west side of 10th Avenue, each taking away 2 lanes of traffic. Well, you're having 6 lanes of traffic merging into 2 lanes. Of course, there's going to be congestion. That has nothing to do with the motorists. That's the city's action. And the city admitted that it's to blame for that construction. Even in the New York City Department of Transportation, in its latest mobility report, its 2019 mobility report, said that there has actually been a drop in the number of vehicles entering the central business district. It also states that the proliferation of the FHVs, the for-hire vehicles, is to blame. They're saying, this is a quote from this DOT's own report, overall, for-hire vehicles are up nearly 90% since 2010, adding 36.9 million trips a year between 2010 and 2017 alone. There's a problem. All the for-hire vehicles that have proliferated on our streets. And then New York State, in its own report, Fix New York, also blames the problem on the for-hire vehicles. It says, quote, these vehicles, for-hire vehicles, are now the most significant source of congestion and the panel suggests unprecedented approaches for tackling the challenge head on, unquote. The state also blames the city for lack of enforcement of parking rules. Quote, the panel believes that increased enforcement of existing traffic laws can have significant positive impacts on congestion relief in the CBD. So you have the city and the state admitting that the problem is lack of enforcement of existing laws and the proliferation of for-hire vehicles. I was on the Crosstown bus on 23rd Street the other day, the M23, and it took us a half an hour to get from 8th Avenue to 3rd Avenue because the bus had to constantly weave in and out of the dedicated bus lane because of all the cars double parked in the bus lane. And also, this is almost unbelievable, I can't make this up. On 23rd Street between 7th and 8th Avenues, the city created a dedicated bus lane, but believe it or not, it allows metered parking in the bus lane. So the bus can't even use the dedicated bus lane because there are all these legally parked cars in the bus lane. The city created it. Motorists didn't create that. The city created that. But the motorists are the ones who are going to have to pay the fixing the problem. Finally, the state report also states regarding cars coming in from the outer boroughs, it states that only 4% of outer borough residents drive into the CBD. So if only 4% of outer borough residents are driving in, how is this congestion pricing going to relieve congestion if it's only 4% of the cars in the outer boroughs are coming into the city? Then on the issue of carve-outs, Ambur talked about this also. She used the example of McDonald's. The city is offering those who live in the district who earn households, not individual households, who earn $60,000 or more, a carve-out. Two wage earners earning the minimum wage have an income of $62,400. So they exceed the $60,000 threshold. But I don't even think, and actually, from what the latest I heard is that Assemblyman Gottfried is now proposing that be raised to $100,000. But the issue of the money, whether it's $100,000 or $100 million of income, is not the issue. The issue is people should not be penalized for living where they live. Just because I happen to live in Chelsea or someone lives in Tribeca, why should we be penalized for that? It's so blatantly unfair. And then the issue of if you drive on the FDR drive, it's free, you don't pay the fee. But what if you get off the FDR drive in the district? It's not so free anymore. And then the issue of tax credits. The state's proposing to give households with $60,000 or less tax credits. Well, that's inherently discriminatory because not everybody has a tax liability upon which they could apply a tax credit. People who earn below a certain income do not pay state taxes, so the tax credit is useless to them. And then there are people such as me and a lot of people at Penn South who live on, basically have two sources of income, government pensions and Social Security, neither of which are taxed by the state. So we would not be able to use a tax credit either. We would have to pay the congestion pricing fee, but we couldn't use the tax credit. So what good is that? Maybe there could be a system where a camera that zaps your license plate when you enter the district and stops you with a fee can see that, all right, that car is registered in the district, we won't send them a bill. But to do it in the form of a tax credit is ludicrous. And just in closing, I just want to add that I've worked my whole life for government. I've worked in planning, I've worked in policy analysis, and I've never seen, and I mean it in all my heart, never seen a more ill-conceived, ill-planned, sloppy proposal as this. It is so full of contradictions. It is so full of based on misfacts that it just cannot stand on its own. Maybe it is as Mr. Komanoff said, maybe it is a fait accompli, but it should not just be tweaked. It really needs to be overhauled completely. That's all I really have to say.
Thank you, Howie. I was going to go to questions, but a lot of important issues have been raised between the participants. So if any of you want to respond to what's been said, just raise your hand and let me know. Yes, Charles. Yes. Just 1 minute. 3 minutes, Charles.
Yeah, right. I'll just respond to Howard's first point, which I think is his main point. Howie, it's eminently possible. In fact, the whole idea of congestion pricing is to reduce traffic congestion and raise revenue at the same time. And I blame myself for not leading with how that works. The idea is to set a toll at a sweet spot, probably around $13 during the peak hours, $4 or $5 during the off-peak hours, that will dissuade 13 or 15%, let's call it 15%, of the trips that otherwise, or that presently drive into the zone. So we get rid of around 15% of the trips. That has a disproportionately positive effect on traffic congestion, because we are at such a congested point, to which you agreed, that getting rid of just 15% of the cars is going to have better than a 15% improvement, on traffic congestion. But the other 85% of the trips remain, and that becomes the cash cow. That's the cash generator to pay for the subway improvements that we all say we want. So there's no contradiction. Nobody's trying to eliminate all of the car and truck and Uber and yellow cab trips into the district. If we can just get rid of 13 or 15%, there will be a visible, welcome, wonderful improvement in our streetscape and our quality of life. But the remaining trips will become the source of the income that will enable subway service to finally significantly improve. No contradiction.
Anyone, any other response? Howard, go ahead. Yes.
Well, I guess if I could respond to that. I mean, it sounds great, Charles, but again, you're saying 15% of the cars coming in, if they're dissuaded from coming in, will reduce congestion. But again, the state and the city in their reports say that that's not the cause of congestion. That's when I think you keep missing the point of having this proliferation. Allow me to finish.
Every vehicle on the road
of 4 higher vehicles that are not coming, that are already in
the time, please,
causing the problem.
Every vehicle on the road contributes to congestion. My vehicle, when I rent a car, your vehicle, I think you said you have one, they all contribute to congestion. So pointing to one sector or another isn't going to get us anywhere.
Well, it's the state and the city that's pointing to that, not me. These are, again, we'll talk Moynihan. What Senator Moynihan said, the facts are the facts. It's the state and the city have pointed to what's causing the problem, and you seem to want to ignore that.
Okay. Ambur, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to jump in a little bit. I think that this plan is based on existing plans. And what I'm asking for us tonight is to take a look at some of the congestion pricing plans that are already out there. And some of them have been out there for years and years, and take a look at where they've been successful and areas where they're already making changes because they say they haven't been successful in those areas. Carve-outs are one of them. You're right. If there were no exemption, you probably would be able to raise more money. Nobody's questioning that. But what the other plans are talking about is they're talking about fairness. They're talking about looking at this holistically so that we can capture revenue from traffic coming from the outside residents, not punish the people who live there, and also make sure that we're supporting people who are part of the necessary infrastructure. And the idea that somebody is collateral damage in a plan because they happen to work in a specific neighborhood or live in a specific neighborhood is one of the things that's being addressed in other cities. We need to do that now. What I'm saying is, it's almost like the MTA is saying, let's implement this plan and don't worry, we know it's flawed, but we're going to fix it later. And what I'm saying is we have an opportunity now to fix it before we get there, because I really believe at what the amount of money that the MTA needs to raise, that this is only a blueprint. And there's no way, based on some of the plans that I've looked at, $55 billion, if we don't think that this plan, A, if it doesn't work, it's going to have to be expanded to a larger area. Or maybe the plan does work. And then exactly that, we're creating a blueprint for what the MTA needs in the future. Either way, to say that we don't have to work this out now is naive. I mean, it's no other city has not been able to make exemptions for the residents who live there or the most vulnerable people in those communities. And that's why, you know, the senator is saying they're already examining, they haven't even implemented the plan, and they're re-examining parts of it because they know if they want it to be successful, that's what's necessary. And I think those were the parts of the plan that we've heard from our senators and from our assemblymen that I'm actually really excited to gauge in that conversation about working together for a resolution. Charles, you have a very specific viewpoint. You're saying it's got to be this way. You know, we can't hear anything else, but that's not going to get everybody to support congestion pricing going forward. We're going to keep people polarized on this issue. And that's not what we need. We already know that it's in the law. We already know the MTA needs the money. This is about finding a way that we can all support this plan long-term. I mean, this is the future. Let's do it right the first time. I mean, we haven't even implemented the plan. We're already fighting amongst ourselves about what's wrong with it. This is not, we're smart enough and responsible enough. You know, the job of the representatives is to do just this. So many things that we're doing are large infrastructure projects. But the idea is always to protect the people and be a voice for the people who need it the most. The fact that we're putting, I mean, in this area, in this community alone in Chelsea, I mean, we've got a huge amount of city housing, affordable housing, low-income housing. These people have to be recognized. The fact that everybody's just saying, oh, Chelsea, everybody can afford to buy a $4 million condo. What's the big deal? It's our responsibility to look at that more closely and not throw away everybody who lives in one community. We have a responsibility to everyone. It is important that if we're going to have congestion pricing, that we do it in a meaningful way. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to move on. One question I was going to throw out, which I think, Jacob, Jacob, have you anything to add?
I just quickly wanted to say, to characterize the senator's position, is we're evaluating the current carve-out system through the existing law that was passed in 2019. So we're going to be looking at the details of those potential carve-outs through the TMRB, the current law, and that board, which still has not been set up yet. So the framework, which I think the legislature agreed was not going to be full of details that could be completely worked out at the legislative level, then allow the TMRB to make those and promulgate those rules. So we're looking through the current law and are not thinking that changes need to be made in what currently exists in the 2019 law.
Thank you. So I'm gonna pose this. I think one question that hasn't been asked and a lot of people don't know, and I'll throw it out to the participants, is how is congestion pricing going to be implemented within the designated area? Anyone of you want to tackle that? Moen?
I can lay out a quick timeline. So they began a 16-month process about 2 months ago, with a goal of implementing the full congestion pricing in the spring of 2023. So they are looking and having meetings with different communities. They're currently looking at social justice groups that are specifically being targeted for potentially big impacts for driving into the city. But that timeline is going to be another year and a half before implementation. The MTA already has their contracts out for the readers that would be used to track people in and out of the zone. But there currently isn't any specific timeline for when those will be built beyond when they plan to implement congestion zone pricing, which is again, spring 2023.
So Jacob, in the information that's collected as people come in and out, or go in rather, what happens to that information? You know, there's a question of privacy.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the important piece is the anecdotal evidence from testimony and from those meetings. My understanding is that will inform the MTA on how it's implemented and how the rules get promulgated by the TMRB. So I don't think there should be any concerns about privacy if they're looking at wholesale what communities are discussing about the implementation.
Okay. Any other comments from the participants? Then I'll throw it up to
Charles?
Yes, go ahead, Howie.
I just want to also, one thing I forgot to just mention, as people brought it up earlier, is that London, everyone's looking to London, but I don't know if they looked at the recent reports coming out of London. Again, London is saying the problem there, as it is here, is with the proliferation of for-hire vehicles. Between 2013 and 2017, there was a 75% increase in the number of for-hire vehicles on the streets of London. As a matter of fact, they've noticed also during that time that bus ridership is way down. And they're saying the bus ridership is way down because people do not want to take buses because the buses move so slowly because there is so much congestion. So they've had a plan in place for a long time, and it's done nothing to reduce the congestion.
And the other thing that we're not adding to the conversation, that when I've looked at other cities, and I'm not opposed to congestion pricing. I'm just saying that at this point in time, the way it's being proposed is not going to work. And I think that needs to change. But one of the complaints about congestion pricing in other cities was they were saying that up to 16% of all the revenue that was raised went into the infrastructure to have the program. It went into administrative costs. It went into putting out, all of these radars on all the blocks to capture everybody who's driving around. It went into people to write the fees and the fines for everybody who are driving. And that only 40% of the total was going to solve the actual transportation problems. And that's a huge issue. That's like somebody who, you donate to a nonprofit and you find out, 90% of it goes to administrative fees. We have to make sure that the money is really going to go to where it's needed most. And I have not seen that laid out in a way that's very clear to me. And it makes it very hard to support the program the way it's designed right now.
Wow, Ambur, it's really annoying actually to hear you cite, and Howie as well, to hear you guys selectively cite London in ways that have almost nothing to do with what is being proposed and is on the way for New York City. London has 390 stations where they have to photograph cars. They don't even have Easy Pass. They had to create something from scratch. So it's no surprise that a large percentage of their revenues does go, as you said, to supporting the system itself. We are in a completely different situation. We have Easy Pass. 95% of all trips on the MTA bridges and tunnels, like the Verrazano, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and so forth, are paid for with Easy Pass. And the same is going to be, it's going to be the same cars, basically. Easy Pass is practically universal. So the administrative costs are going to be somewhere between $100 and $150 million a year. So it's not nothing, but it's not the 500 or 600 million that you're talking about. Now, part of why—
Wait, hold on, Charles.
Yeah.
I didn't tell you how much it was going to cost. So I don't, you got to stick to what I'm saying.
But you just said that 60% of what London raises through its congestion
and that is correct.
Goes to support sort of the system of recording and collecting the tolls.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that may be London. Here, it's going to be like 10 or 12%.
But it hasn't been identified yet, Charles. So the people that we're talking to—
Ambur, it's totally been identified. It's going to be using Easy Pass, and for the 5% that don't have it, it's going to be license plate photographs, and those drivers are going to pay more in order to make up the difference. Now, as to Howie, your point about London traffic is just, you said, is just as bad as it was before. Now, to some extent, that's true. There are grains of truth in what you guys are saying. But the reason for that, there's two. One is, as you said, they don't charge residents of the district. They also exempt for-hire vehicles. We do neither. I mean, I hope you guys know that every time any of us in the district takes a yellow cab, we're paying a $2.50 surcharge, or an Uber or a Lyft, $2.75. That's a sort of pre-taste of congestion pricing that, to be honest, was done in a pretty dumb way at the beginning of 2019. That was supposed to be a down payment. Jacob, I see you smiling for that. That was a mistake. But what that almost guarantees is that we're not going to be paying, those vehicles aren't going to be charged the congestion fee because they are already paying one. Meanwhile, London, and this is all pre-pandemic, in 2019, if you compare London now to what it was in 2002, just before they put in congestion pricing, 22% more people are coming into the heart of London, into its congestion zone, people, not cars, people per day, than was the case beforehand. So if they don't have improved car speeds, that's quite an achievement to get 22% more activity in a city and to keep car speeds or bus speeds from deteriorating further. That's sort of not bad. But meanwhile, what they did a few months ago, you probably know this, is that they raised their congestion toll in order to stay ahead of the game. So they're figuring it out. And maybe they'll figure out that they've got to charge their for-hire vehicles and charge people who live in the district to make the thing really sing better.
And that's exactly what we're worried here, is that we're going to start at one price and we're going to increase it.
No, because we're going to be able.
Charles,
let me just respond quickly.
We're going to be able
to make the $1 billion a year that we have to. And once we make that, there isn't going to be the need to raise the rate beyond.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. There are people who want to ask questions, so I want to move on to that. The discussion is great, but let's go to questions. Fran, is your question, Fran? I'm mute. Is your question directed at anybody particular?
Just
Fran?
for everybody. The point is that I frequently go and come from Suffolk County in New York State, and I come through the Midtown Tunnel, and I'd like to describe what happens with the congestion when the last exit before you get to the Midtown Tunnel is to go off, is to leave the highway, to wander around and to come over the 59th Street Bridge. That causes congestion all of the time. People who don't want to pay the fee for the Midtown Tunnel, but who want to go for free. And the backup, the congestion backup, is sometimes an hour long and miles long. So there's a question about what will happen. I don't get off on 59th Street. I pay for the toll. But I think this is a very, very serious thought. My second thought is, has the state tried to see if what people will do with congestion pricing, not in London, not anyplace else, but in New York City, to see if this can work?
I would like to answer that.
I think, yeah.
Charles has his hand up.
Who would like? Go ahead.
Charles has his hand up.
Excuse me.
Charles has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it, Charles. Go ahead.
Francine, I'm like you. When I rent a car at LaGuardia, and bike and drive back in to pick up my family, I go through the Midtown Tunnel because I value the speed, and I'm willing to pay the toll. My modeling suggests that once we put the congestion toll on the Queensboro, Williamsburg, Manhattan, and Brooklyn bridges, because they're going to be paying the toll, that immediately there will be about a 20% reduction in the volume of cars and trucks going over those spans. And over the long haul, that 20% reduction will become around 30 or 35%, because the investment of the congestion revenues in better subways and buses will be the carrot that will supplement the stick that is congestion pricing.
I have one more point that I didn't make, and that is, anytime things happen when prices go up, the consumer pays. And I fully expect that if I had a plumber who came from Brooklyn who was going to come into Manhattan, or a painter who lives in Queens who comes into Manhattan, that I will end up paying for his congestion pricing.
Okay, let's talk about that plumber. And I'm going to say she. I'm going to try to be non-sexist about it. That plumber probably services, 4 jobs a day in the city? Is that about right? So that's 20 jobs a week. And what does that plumber get for each job that she services? Probably about $200. That's sort of my guess. I'm doing this math on the fly. So that plumber is going to gross, 20 per week, 20 jobs a week, and $200. So that's $4,000 a week. Now the plumber is going to pay, I'll be straight with you, more than the $13. It's probably going to be $20 because vans are going to get charged more than regular cars. So that plumber is going to be paying $100 a week in the toll. Well, if that plumber, I threw out more numbers than I needed to. If that plumber can squeeze another half a job per week, because she's not spending so much time stuck in traffic getting into Manhattan and then getting from, Francine's place to my place, then she's not going to have to raise her price. In other words, the difference, what makes congestion pricing such a powerful idea, is that we do get something for the money that we are paying in the toll. We get a faster, more predictable, more reliable trip. And that's worth something. It's not money that's just going to go up in smoke. And the plumber is not going to have to raise her fee. The painter isn't going to have to raise his fee, on and on, which is why members, of like the trucking association are not lined up against this because they understand that time is money.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on
I'm
to Joe and then Tom and Marianne afterwards. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. This has been very insightful as someone who has a car and lives in the area. And I'll say, like, with my soul, I want to be a supporter of congestion pricing. It's definitely the right thing, but I'm curious on just some of the financial amount, the numbers, really. Like, you know, based on the math of $1 billion in a year, and I think, Charles, you would put that number out there of $13 to $20, obviously seems really steep for a toll. I mean, pretty much an hour's work. So I was curious if there's any consideration on capping any individual's annual amount that they would have to pay. And just one other point on the dollars, remember, Charles, I think you started by saying, don't let perfect get in the way of being good, which is a very good quote. I'm wondering if there would be, it just seems like a very substantial amount. So I would think carve-outs would be logical. And if that means it's 500 million, it's still 500 million we didn't have earlier. And then again, just the question about if there'd be any consideration on individual maximum payments or anything like that annually.
Was that directed towards anyone, Joe? Anybody?
No,
Yeah, I mean, I'll
Anybody
jump.
want to try that?
Yeah, I'll jump in because I think that Joe, you know, from the people that we've been talking to in the community, we've been talking about this for months. Your viewpoint is very on par with I'm pretty much consistently hearing. People aren't opposed to congestion pricing, but they are opposed to looking at it and examining it in a way where there aren't protections put in place. Nobody is saying, very few people are saying adamantly, we don't want this at all. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not hearing that. What I am hearing, though, is be thoughtful, be cautious about how it's implemented so that it's done in a way that it's going to be successful. And when people mean successful, Charles, they don't just mean how much money you're raising. They also mean being thoughtful and putting in protections so that when we do have congestion pricing, people are not rallying that they're being hurt by it. And I think that's really at the key to the success of this program. I think taking a really hardline stance where it's got to be this way and there's no exemption for anybody, Charles, it's not appealing to anybody to get this, you know, the support that it needs. You're going to end up with people feeling like they have to be opposed to congestion pricing because they know of people personally, or they know of businesses that are going to speak out against it. And it's just, you know, that's not how city usually gets things done. There's usually a lot of back and forth. There's usually a thought and caring about it. There's always a little bit of compromise. And the idea is you put that compromise in to make the plan overall work for the most amount of people.
Okay, and Charles, do you want to answer? You want to respond also?
You know, Ambur, the optimal congestion charge, okay, I'm going to deliberately put on my wonky, pointy-headed Adlai Stevenson hat, you know, is probably around $50 or $60 for a toll. That would be the amount that would be, you know, in an ivory tower, in a wonky chamber. That would be the toll that would improve traffic flow, save time, clean the air, generate money, improve mass transit, and not price every trip on the road, but price a number of them off the road. That is sort of like the theoretical optimum. I'm not for that. Nobody is really for that. I'm settling for a price, a toll that's going to be $13 probably, maybe a tiny bit more. So there is already a compromise that has brought it down. You know, I mean, so in my fantasies, I can imagine a city in which we had this super high congestion toll, and it would, you know, it might be wonderful and everybody could ride bikes and, you know, we could do cartwheels in the street, but that's not the way politics works. I get it. And the more that we call for taking care of him or her or them or this or that, the more we're going to jeopardize this, I think, fragile. I'll be really straight with you. It is fragile. It's not a robust, it's hard to do something as bold as this because the people who are going to benefit from it have a hard time seeing that ahead of time. That's what the whole field of behavioral economics is all about, where it's easier to identify the loss than the gain. And look at Stockholm. Nobody's talked about Stockholm. Before they did congestion pricing, 60% were against and 40% were for it. Once they did it, the numbers flipped.
Okay, thank you, Tom and Marianne. You're on.
Yeah, I have one concern. I mean, actually, I would really like to see a congestion pricing plan. And I don't drive that much, so I'll pay it if I have to. It's okay with me. But I don't want to see it defeat itself. If you could reduce the traffic congestion by 15%, this would be an amazing improvement to our quality of life in this area. I would be all for it. But is there any, if the traffic goes down 15%, that's going to be an incentive for more people to join Uber and Lyft and bring in more for hire vehicles and take it right. Is there any provision to prevent an increase in the amount of for hire vehicles, or we're just going to lose it to them? And that is, I think, is a real concern. And if the thing turns out to be self-defeating, what I really wish is there was a sunset provision. So after 5 or 10 years, they would have to renew it. And if it were not working, then they would. But that ship has probably sailed a long time ago. But anyway, I'd just like to know if there's any way to prevent more for hire vehicles to come in and filling the gap that the private vehicles will be leaving.
Charles, I see you want to answer.
Yeah, Tom, I'm going to kind of go out on a limb and say I love your 5-year sunset idea. I would be willing to support it based on my confidence in the Stockholm result that I just described. So I think it's a lovely idea. What you're talking about with the the Ubers filling the gap, in some ways it's called the rebound effect. Maybe it should be the Yogi Berra effect. That we clear out space and then vehicles are going to sort of exploit it, in an opportunistic way because traffic is so much better or smoother. We can drive now. That is built into everybody's models. It's built into mine. It's built into the model that the MTA people are now using. People who do this traffic engineering, we're not stupid. So we've thought of all that. But in terms of the Ubers, I just want you to know, in terms of keeping faith, because I love the spirit in which you asked that question. I did a study for the City Council Speaker's Office that got released at the beginning of the year that urged a fee on Ubers and Lyfts that are stockpiled within Manhattan. In other words, that when they are empty, except for the driver, that they should be paying a per minute charge. It's a nice idea. It didn't go anywhere because, the time is right. It wasn't right. We're all preoccupied with other things like COVID and, the city's recovery and the aftermath of Trump, on and on and on. But once we get congestion pricing, and Ambur, I hope I'm not sort of opening my own Pandora's box here, then we can be talking about more systemic charging of Uber and Lyft and Amazon delivery vehicles in a way that will not only make sure that they don't opportunistically take advantage of the space that we're clearing out, but that can make sure that they pay their fair share.
Howie, you want to respond?
I also agree with Charles. I think that the idea Tom had of a sunset provision is terrific. Love it. But Charles says because he feels that it will way of Stockholm and therefore will be renewed. I think we'll go the way of London and be a failure and won't be renewed.
Okay, well, let's make a deal.
But because London has been a disaster and all the data show that. But again, as Tom was saying, this issue of overflowing into for hire vehicles, that again, and I don't want to keep harping on this, but that is the problem. The state and the city in their reports have all said The main cause of all the congestion is the proliferation of for-hire vehicles, and no one is addressing that issue. We're trying to slap these fees on the people who are not responsible for the problem and punishing them for no reason at all, and letting those who are causing the problem, the for-hire vehicles, getting away scot-free. That's the issue. Let's address the issue. The data all point to the fact that the proliferation of for-hire vehicles, along with the lack of enforcement in double parked cars and parking in bus lanes, are causing the problem. We're not dealing with the issue. And I think it's the reason, and I don't want to sound cynical, but we all know that the city does this all and the state does this all the time. They see this as a revenue enhancement. They see this as a way of raising money. They don't give a damn can reduce congestion or not. It's a way to raise revenue. And that's for all this issue of raising revenue for the MTA. No one's talked about that. Right. The infrastructure bill that the President of the United States just signed, there's $10 billion for the MTA. Plus, my understanding is there's an additional $11.5 billion of COVID relief money for the MTA. That's $21 billion. I once mentioned that a few weeks ago to Senator Hoylman about the $10 billion. And he said, well, $10 billion for the MTA is a drop in the bucket. Well, if the $10 billion is a drop in the bucket, then there's something seriously wrong with the MTA. There's something seriously wrong with management at the MTA. That $10 billion should be a drop in the bucket. And they should be the ones who should be accountable for it, and not the motorists and not the consumer.
Thank you, Howard. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? Well, if not, I'm going to ask the participants to sum up. We'll reverse order. So Howie, you can start first.
I have a quick.
Wait,
I have
David.
a quick.
Go ahead.
Quick.
Yes, David.
First of all, thank you all for.
Is this a question or a comment?
Well, it could be both. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you coming, especially Charles. As past president of the Chelsea Reform Democrat Club, we actually endorsed congestion pricing, and the reasoning was out of compassion and also because of pollution and climate change. I mean, we are a prosperous nation. How do we ask the third world like India and China not to sacrifice if we're not willing to sacrifice? So that's the main reason why it's not just us locally. We're also setting an example for the rest of the world in traffic. If we're not going to spend a little bit, how do you expect? I'm asking, how do you expect others to control pollution and climate change and put in special taxes? I mean, the Republicans are all against congestion pricing. If you look at the transportation issues in the citywide elections these past time, their bell whistle was anti-congestion pricing. We are a progressive Democrat club who has compassion, and sometimes we might have to sacrifice our money. You know, we're prosperous. We could afford it.
Yes, thank you, David. Okay, we'll then proceed. Howard, you'll start.
Well, I just want to say, I don't understand how you consider a regressive fee being compassionate when it's going to just literally destroy the poor and the middle working class in the city. How is that compassion? It makes absolute sense. And there are plenty of Democrats. I'm a Democrat and I'm against it. So don't say only the Republicans are against it. It's just not true.
All right. Do you want to sum up, Howard?
Yeah.
And then we'll go. And then we'll go.
But the issue is, you know, I want to go back to this issue of carve-outs. I mean, people, you know, you want to spend Christmas morning at the Antilles and Teaneck, or spend a Passover Seder with your Bertie and Great Neck. You shouldn't have to pay a ransom or a extortion to be able to come home. It's as simple as that. We're being penalized for living where we live. That is not, I don't see the fairness in that. I have a friend of mine who lives on 60th Street, which is the very start of the district. I tell him when he takes a cab home from the airport to tell him to drop him off at 61st Street and walk the extra block with your luggage so you don't have to pay the fee. I mean, it's getting that ludicrous. So, and again, the issue, as I mentioned before, of if we do have carve-outs, to do in the form of tax credits, I'm not an attorney, but I doubt very much if something as discriminatory as that could hold up in court, because there are a lot of people who don't have a tax liability who could use that. So you're excluding a whole group of people by offering these tax credits. So that's not the way to go. So overall, again, there is nothing, and I mean nothing in this plan that makes any sense or that would produce anything positive.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Jacob next.
First, thank you so much for having me. And second, thank you to everyone who is on this panel. I think this has been a really good discussion. I would just reiterate the senator's point of his support for congestion pricing, and also our desire to see what the Traffic Mobility Review Board does in the next year when it's set up, to see what this plan actually is going to look like. I think to Amber's point a little bit, we didn't fill in a lot of details in the law and are relying very heavily on the TMRB to fill in some of those details. So it's difficult for us to say with complete certainty what the program is going to look like beyond what is being outlined right now. So we really appreciate your comments and would encourage you to reach out to the MTA to voice those concerns and share your opinion, because they will have an impact on how it's implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Amber?
Yeah, I just to go back, CRDC did support this, but what David's mentioning is at the time that this came before the committee, the best model in place to reference was the London plan. And there's so many exemptions and carve outs in that plan. When I first heard about that, as Brad Hoylman, who was here tonight, he referenced the London plan. Everybody was referencing the same plan. And it was not a plan where there were no exemptions. It never occurred to me that in a progressive area like Lower Manhattan, we wouldn't automatically know that we need to make carve outs for those people who are most economically vulnerable to this. All of NYCHA housing is built with parking in it. And there's a reason, and it's by law. And there's more flexibility for people in the community who are the most poor when they have more options. Everybody used to go to Trader Joe's because they had delivery. They eliminated delivery. I see all of our families out there in car shares picking up their groceries for the week. They're using vehicles. They're using their own vehicles and they're sharing with their neighbors. And this is what a community does when it needs to, when they're at that margin where every dollar counts. I want us to recognize, I don't want to disregard that because we're talking about the greater impact of this. There is enough money in this proposed plan and the additional money coming to the government so that we can identify and protect those people in our community.
Okay, thank you, Amber. Well, Charles?
I just want to ask Amber, what exactly are you referring to about people who aren't going to be able to go to the supermarket? We have supermarkets within the zone. I mean, I live in Tribeca. I go to the Trader Joe's on Spring Street. I don't have to
they don't deliver. They don't deliver anymore.
Side.
They eliminated it, Charles. So people go in their vehicles now.
Okay, so somebody who lives in Penn South or in the Fulton houses on 9th Avenue.
Yeah.
So they'll go to a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods for, which I don't do because I don't want to support Jeff Bezos. They don't have to go to Queens or Northern Manhattan or New Jersey for that. They go within the zone so they won't pay. So what is the thing that you're,
it's about having flexibility. Charles, if you can't understand the concept of building in some protections at some level, then there's no use talking about it. You have a hard line stance and that's it.
Amber,
that's fine. I don't have to, if you don't understand, there's no explaining it to you, Charles. So why don't you, instead of arguing with me, why don't you go back to what your summary, which is what you're supposed to be doing right now, and make your case and let everybody here decide.
Okay. I tried to say at the beginning, and I'm going to try to say again now. that we've got to decide, do we want it or not? And if you don't want congestion pricing, fine, you're entitled to your opinion and tell your elected representatives that you're against it. But it is a fiction to believe that we can have congestion pricing. And Jacob, I'm sort of trying to address you now, and have the flexibility and the compromise and the carve outs that Howie and Ambur are clamoring for. It's not going to happen because the whole thing is going to collapse like a house of cards. And maybe you'll say, oh, okay, fine, because you don't want the $1 billion a year that will support the $15 billion in capital investment that the MTA needs, because even if they're going to get money from Biden and the feds to pay to modernize the signals, they're still going to need money to install elevators at more than the 80 out of 472 subway stations that now have them. You know, the needs of the MTA are in fact pretty endless. And yeah, some of it is because they're not well managed. I get it. We all get it. The Riders Alliance gets it. They are working on better MTA governance. But you should be looking yourselves. Why does the Community Service Society? Why do the environmental justice groups? Why do they support congestion pricing? And why are they holding the line against carve-outs? Because they know that we're going to have to take pretty much what we've got and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank Charles, Ambur, Howie, and Jacob for their participation tonight. It was a fascinating, vigorous discussion of a very controversial issue. So thank you very much for your time and
thank you
for your input. So I'm going to turn it over to Mindy now.
Want to thank everyone for coming to the program this evening. This program was recorded and there'll be probably sometime tomorrow afternoon or evening, we'll have it ready to be shared. But on that note, coming up, we'll have the details out shortly, but save the date, December 5th will be our holiday celebration over Zoom. So with that, I would like to wish everybody a good night.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, and a happy Thanksgiving. I'm so sorry.
Same to you, Charles. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Good
David,
night.
thanks for inviting
Thank
me.
you, everyone.
Good
Yeah.
night.
Thank you.
Amber,
night.
nice to meet you. Howie,
night.
nice to meet you.
Same here, Charles. Enjoyed it.
Have a
Good.
good night.